Hello everyone, welcome to StraightA. Dawson here, back on another video here today, and we are talking about the NFL teams' chances to make the playoffs right here, right now. On screen, I basically have a tier list set up of showing the different percentages and their tiers right now. I'll probably do this in intervals. Right now, we're 1/3 of the way through the season essentially, so I may do another checkup around halfway point, and then maybe a weekly series starting around week 13, week 14, somewhere around there when people start getting eliminated from the playoffs. But I figured there was a good idea that was made in the comments over one of my power rankings 2 weeks ago, I believe, about, okay, since apparently my power rankings are all subjective and not exactly having any dog in the fight essentially, I think it's also really important to at least highlight the fact that there are standings and how teams are currently doing, despite me being higher on some teams that have a lower chance and lower on some teams that have a higher chance. So I want to make sure I took this video to acknowledge how well they're doing, and kind of also put into perspective of how well these teams are doing based on percentages. So on tier list, I have above 90%, so they're basically a lock. 89 to 70, they're pretty damn good chances to make it. 70 to 50%, they're on the tier, they're on the teeter totter. 49 to 30, also kind of same but a little bit lower tier. And 29 to 10, they're basically out but never know. And 10%, well, you're basically out of here. And I have this nice little website. I may put it in the description if I remember to do it. But really cool if you want to check out like different percentages currently as the teams stand. I believe this is all updated, yep, as of week 7 or going into week 7. This is all pretty cool, and we'll talk about some of the teams as we go here. But before we get started, please leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and comment any suggestions for future videos below. Without further ado, let's get right into the video. So to make this as simple as possible for me, because it's kind of an awkward screening to look here and look here and remember exactly where everybody goes, I'm not going to go necessarily in this order. I'm going to kind of talk about top to bottom. So first of all, with the highest chance to make the playoffs right now are the Kansas City Chiefs, due to the AFC having slightly weaker records right now and them being 5-0. It kind of helps them out. They're sitting at a 98% chance to make the playoffs. I mean, with your floor being 5-12 and your ceiling still being 17-0, it's a pretty damn good shot of you making the playoffs. Weaker division, Chiefs doing well. So really self-explanatory there. The second highest is no surprise there with the Vikings being 5-0, wherever their logo is right here. They're at 96%, so slightly less, but I mean, NFC has slightly better records. They're in a really good division, so like they could possibly be knocked off a little bit less. So I see where that percentage is kind of coming from. Still very good shot of making the playoffs here though. Then we only have one other team in our top tier. Very interesting, and I would not have predicted this, and probably gives me a little new shed of light of how well the Texans are doing. Texans are at 95% chance to make the playoffs. Now, granted, they are in a very weak division. Despite them, I mean, they've done really well. They're 5-1, so I can't really give them discredit. But looking at the the Colts being the second best team basically in that division is 3-3. The Titans are still 1-4. And what's the other team in that division? The freaking Jaguars, who are 1-5 as well. It's really tough for anybody else really to be in that kind of conversation. Texans have a really good division to be in. These are only 3 teams that are basically locks as of this moment to make the playoffs. I'm not really surprised. These are all very good teams, and I see all 3 of them making the playoffs pretty easily. I don't necessarily see the Vikings being the number 1 seed, and I don't necessarily see the Chiefs being the number 1 seed. I think the Texans have a conversation here, and I think some other teams have a sneaky number 1 seed upside to them. But moving forward, weirdly enough, this still goes in a little bit weirder like ordering here. But the next highest one I see is 82%, with the Buffalo Bills being basically the top of the second tier. Makes sense. They've been competing very well. Their record's pretty all right, and their division isn't the best either. So I think they have a pretty good chance as well, 4-2. They have a sneaky upside for number 1 seed, but I think they're going to be like number 2 seed or number 3 seed type upside, so I'm not really too worried about it. And forgive me, there's a lot of numbers here, so I may kind of jump around at this point of percentages, because there's like 7s get mixed up, 6s, all that stuff. But from the next highest one I see is the Steelers at 77%. Again, it kind of goes in that conversation of their division is I think a very good division, but they have been not performing very good. The Steelers have been winning games. And again, the AFC is slightly weaker, so I mean, I could see the Steelers kind of sneaking in with a higher chance to win. With them having a 4-2 record, also very much controls their kind of destiny at this point. So still very good, but a little surprising to see that they are basically the 5th highest chances to make the playoffs. Kind of just skipping around at this point. The Buccaneers are at 74% right now, so pretty good percentage chance to be competing very well. Again, goes back to the whole thing of their division's not great, but there's at least 2 teams, probably just the Falcons though, that are competing well with them in that division. but then the wild card spot is still very, very much doable for either the Falcons or the Bucks. So Buccaneers at around 74% makes total sense to me. Now, we're just below them, the Ravens at 73%. Kind of goes back to the conversation of, unfortunately, now they're with the Steelers, so Ravens haven't been competing well very early on. The record's very similar to the Steelers. I think the Steelers haven't played the Ravens yet, so we'll see how that really changes up the percentages going forward. But they are really neck and neck still. Both these teams, the Steelers and the Ravens, still feel very, very close to making the playoffs. But the Ravens have been struggling early on. The record's not as good as they hope. 4-2 is not what you want to be at, but they have done well of rebuilding themselves just a little bit, getting back in the swing of things. Then, weirdly enough, with a lot lower chance to win or make the playoffs, and I guess it's just because their division's so tough, is the Detroit Lions. They have a 67% chance to make the playoffs. So actually, they're right here in this tier, 67%. So they're the top of this tier right here. Unfortunately, I guess it's just because, well, number one, I mean, right now the Vikings have a clear lead in that division, even though the Lions are only one loss behind them. So it just takes 1 week to really change the tide there. But also, I mean, you got the Bears and you got the Packers. Both those teams have been doing very, very well. So every win counts. So I can see the discrepancy being quite different there. But it is curious that 67% to 96% by a one-loss margin in the same division produces this type of percentage. So very, very weird to see the Lions at that lower percentage, but we'll see. In fact, there's actually another team that's above them technically. That's the Atlanta Falcons at 68%. They have a 68% chance of making the playoffs. Granted, again, that discrepancy makes a lot of sense because I think the Bucks have the tiebreaker on them, but they have the same record. So it's very, very close at this point. So like what, they're at 72, like 73 basically to 68. 5% discrepancy, not much there at all. So very, very curious indeed. Looking again, going through all these teams, I see next around the Chargers standpoint at 66% being the next one up. So that would be just below the Lions at 68. No, 60. Sorry, I'm kind of losing track here. It's 67, and now the Chargers will be 66%. Makes a little bit of sense. Looking where the Broncos are at 41% and the Raiders are down there at 15%. They're not doing as well. The Chargers have been producing pretty good results, as well as the win record's 3-2 right now. Unfortunately, they're kind of playing for a wild card though, because the Chiefs usually lock that down pretty well, and the Chiefs already have a 2 wins ahead of them already. So the Chargers being this low does make sense, but also being a sneaky little 66%, pretty nice for the Chargers to actually still make the playoffs. The discrepancy between them and the Broncos is a little weird, just since I know they are one loss. I guess the Chargers just got broke tiebreaker against the Broncos, so we'll see how that changes as the season goes forward. Very, very curious indeed, though. Right below them are the Commanders at 64%. Very pleasant to see the Commanders have such a high chance of making the playoffs. Very, very good to see. Jane Daniels and that team has been producing offensive results, and their team is looking like they're going in the right direction, possibly a 9-8, 10-7 kind of outlook. Their division's not the easiest one in the world, but it's also not impossible for them to do. So them being the highest in their division, actually, right? Because I don't see the Giants, the Eagles, or the Cowboys here. So very, very good to see. They actually do have a good, strong chance. Granted, the records in that division are still very, very close. The Eagles had a bye, so they technically one loss behind or one win behind, but also they haven't had a bye yet. So very, very curious. But looking forward, I see 3 teams in a row here: the Eagles, the Packers, and the Colts. Eagles, Packers, boom. Let's say that's 54%. Eagles, Packers, and Colts are 54, 53, and 50%. So 54% for the Eagles, 53% for the Packers, and 50% for the Colts. Kind of all makes sense. Again, the Eagles and the Commanders are basically really, really damn close, so it doesn't really matter too much there. The Packers are 53%, which, I mean, again, with them having such a good record in such a bad division, or sorry, such a good division, it makes sense that their percentage is so low, but still very favorable, just because, again, getting that wild card spot when you're 4-2 right now makes a lot of sense, or makes your case really good, but also your case goes down a lot because you have a 5-0 team in your division right now. So they definitely go down a little bit. The Colts, kind of the same case there. They are the clearest number 2 team in their division, but also they have a 4-1 team that's been doing very, very well. So it doesn't look likely they'll win their division, but they also have a very good chance at least kind of securing that kind of 50-50 shot at securing a wild card. So currently that is all the teams right now from what I can see, unless I'm missing somebody, just because, again, the screen's a little bit weird to read off of. All the teams that are currently 50% or above to make the playoffs. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So this essentially does work out of the math-wise. So right now we would have the Chiefs, the Texans, the Bills, the Steelers, the Ravens, the Chargers, and the Colts all making the playoffs, and then the Vikings, the Bucks, the Falcons, the Lions, the Commanders, the Eagles, and the Packers all making the playoffs. All very capable. I think the Bills and the Bucks are pretty good secures, and the Ravens are all very secured for their playoff spot too. I think they're going to eventually get up here pretty quickly into the 90% tier. Steelers, I imagine they're going to be floating more in the 70 to 50% for most of the time, but it's really cool to see them up there, so cool. Falcons, I think them and the Saints will kind of also play around with the 70 to 50 and 49 to 30. We'll see how those two teams go. Detroit, they're eventually going to go in the 89-70. They'll probably secure a playoff push. Chargers, I expect them to go down. Commanders, I do expect them to kind of hover around the 50% margin more so here in the coming weeks. They don't have the easiest games coming up as well, but they also have, I think, a decent shot still getting a wild card, if not winning the division. Eagles, kind of the same case with the Commanders here. I think they're going to kind of swap back and forth a little bit until we get like a good divide here near week 14, week 15, week 16 even, of like who's going to actually be the divisional winner. They'll be fighting for it the whole time, but I think that both their records could be good enough for the wild card anyway, so we'll see where they kind of land. The Green Bay Packers, this is a weird one just because, again, I can see the Packers, just because they're in such a tough division, kind of stealing some percentages from the Vikings along with the Lions, so maybe they can kind of increase their stock, but I see the Packers being around the 49 to 30 spot much more, along with kind of the Bears, and we'll talk about the Bears here in a minute. And the Colts, I see their stock going very far down very quickly. They're kind of a fraud one in here, so I see like 3 or 4 of these teams possibly changing over time. So, and by the way, so far I'm going to mention there are 7, 8, 9 teams, 9 teams total right now that they do not control their destiny anymore, meaning that they have to rely on other losses. Now, granted, at this point in the season, there's a lot of games left, so they don't have to rely on like a team to lose like 8 games or anything, but they do not control their destiny. So what I mean by that is, for example, if a team does not control their destiny, it means they could win out, and in the perfect scenario, they would not make the playoffs. So we have not gotten to any of those teams just yet. They are further down the line, but I wanted to mention that all these teams currently, they win out, they control their destiny. Granted, that's 12 games, 11 games in some cases, but it's really hard to do. So going into the next tier, I see the top team being 41% at the Chicago Bears. Oh, tied with the Denver Broncos. So Chicago Bears and the Denver Broncos both at 41%, which is the highest percentage below 50%. Both these teams control their destiny. Of course, Chicago has a 4-2 record in a very tough division, so it means, yeah, they're probably not going to win their division. It's also unlikely the bottom team, which is currently projected to be the Bears, will make the playoffs, but it's also very, very possible the AFC North almost did it last time, so we'll see if the NFC North is possibly going to do it this time. Chicago, I think, is going to be hovering around the spot pretty frequently. Same with the Broncos. Broncos will go 4-3 or 4-4 or 5-3, or sorry, 5-4, 5-5, 5-6, 6-6. They're going to keep on bouncing around that 50% margin, but probably stick in this area. I don't love their chances to make the playoffs, but also I like their schedule and I like how they've been competing. They're 3-3, so it's not the worst record in the world, especially in the weaker AFC wild card kind of division. Again, the Colts are very susceptible to being taken from that, and the Chargers, I think, are very susceptible to being taken from that. I think there's 4 teams that are solidified: the Chiefs, the Texans, the Bills, and the Ravens. I think all 4 of those teams are going to make the playoffs, whether they win division or not. So I think those kind of spots are over. But then there's some wild card spots you can possibly take in and out for those teams. So I think the wild card in the AFC is very, very doable for anybody that's even 3-3, even 2-4 to some extent. So very, very cool to see. Next up at 37% are the Seattle Seahawks. And then right after that, the 49ers at 36%. So this is really where we get to the interesting parts of the conversation, because Seattle and the 49ers are both teams I have highly ranked. And if we kind of talk about where I kind of rank these teams, the Chiefs are number 1, clearly for a lot of reasons. The Vikings on my power rankings are 13. Again, I don't see them securing this top spot for very long. I think the Texans somewhere in the top 8, the Bills somewhere in the top 6, top 7, top possibly. Steelers top 14, the Bucks, like they're somewhere in their top 8, the Ravens top 5, Falcons, they're somewhere in the 22 spot, but also don't like the NFC South division. So just because the Falcons are like 22 and the Bucks and all that, I like the Bucks way more than the Falcons, even though they're very close in record, because obviously it's still going to be a closer division. It's just kind of one of those discrepancies of like, okay, the Falcons, even though they're like basically right behind the Bucks in percentage chance, the Bucks have been playing better, and I like seeing the team play better. In fact, I would say sometimes the number 7 or 6 seed even that make the playoffs are a worse team than some teams that don't make the playoffs. But that's very, that's very like minute cases here too. So beside the point. But now we kind of get into the cases of like, sure, okay, Lions are like top 5 for me, but they're also lower percentage chance. It gets in that weird percent. You cannot tell me the Lions are not a top 5 team, but they have literally like the what's called 6, 7, 8, the 9th best chance to make the playoffs. You cannot tell me they're not a top 5. You can't tell me the Falcons are better than the Lions. This is why I don't like going by records or playoff chances, like solely, because the Lions have been playing better than almost every team above them, in my opinion, except for maybe the Bills, maybe the Vikings, maybe the Chiefs, maybe the Ravens. Those are like the 4 teams, even the Texans maybe. So like they are like at least 6 in my mind. Beside the point. We won't get into that. But Seattle and 49ers are a big proponent of this. They are both less than 50%. Yet the Seattle's like number 13 on my power rankings, and the 49ers are like number 4 now. So again, you can't look at the 49ers roster and say, oh my gosh, they lost 3 games, and oh my gosh, they're not going to pick the playoffs because they suck. They've been losing games. You cannot tell me they're not a top 5, top 10 team at the very least. If you say they're outside the top 10 team, then you are fucking nuts and you don't know ball. You have not watched a single football game. The 49ers are at least a top 10 team. If I think easily top 5 because their roster is really good. They have not been playing the greatest, but they are putting the things together. Their players are getting healthy again. Brock Purdy's piecing things together. That's a big discrepancy. And they have a very low chance of making the playoffs. But they're probably going to be a team that's easily going to rise up these rankings very, very slowly, but very quickly at the same time. These other 3 teams, I'm not going to be too surprised if they hover around the spot pretty frequently until they don't. So we'll kind of move on from there. Next team up is the Dallas Cowboys. This is a team that actually is, in my mind, even though they're kind of highly rated in my power rankings currently, they're probably going to go down when I officially make it for this upcoming week because they've been playing horrible. I got to finally punish them. They have not been playing good ball at all. Their offense has sucked. Their defense has sucked even more. Biggest fall off in defensive football history, in my opinion. Not probably history, but you get what I kind of say. And they are like a 34% chance to make the playoffs currently, and that's probably more accurate to how they have been producing the results. So I'm going to start punishing the Cowboys, and I understand at this point I'm now down on the Cowboys. So do not worry, do not fret. I have finally drank the Kool-Aid. Because the Cardinals at 30%, honestly, probably has a better chance than the Cowboys at this point in my mind. Cardinals, though, at 30% makes a lot of sense. Again, they don't have the best record. They have been struggling a lot, but, I mean, they're also in a very capable winning position, especially with the 49ers not doing very, very well. The Seattle Seahawks not doing very well. They all have a kind of a good, even chance between the Cardinals, the 49ers, the Seahawks, and the Rams. All those teams kind of have a good, similar record, so they all could possibly make the playoffs and win their division, but they're all very similar in that regard. So they're also going to struggle to get the wild card spot. So that is the last 30% team. The only team I see really rising are the 49ers. Next up, at the very top of the next tier, are the Miami Dolphins, 29%. Again, they've been struggling very early on. Makes sense with their record being so bad at 2-3. So not really much to say there. Right behind them, New York Jets, kind of the same case there. They have a good roster and could kind of get in that 49 to 30% here soon with a couple games of wins, especially with Devontae Adams being on the team now. Robert Saleh traded away, or not traded away, but fired. So I think this could increase over time, but I'm not going to count on it going up to over 50% until like near the very end. But they could definitely do it. I'm not going to kind of fault them if they. I'm not going to fight against anybody who says that the Jets are going to make the playoffs, because I also think the Jets could potentially have a really good roster, but they just haven't been playing well. They haven't got the wins, and they haven't really shown much potential from the previous year. So, perfect. Next up, 21%, and the first team that does not control their destiny, that's the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals have a 21% chance of making the playoffs. And again, goes back to that same thing of, I think the Bengals are number 14 on my power rankings, but they are essentially like a bottom 10 team in chance to make the playoffs. But I think this is a team that is going to continue to rise up this percentage chance. So I think that I'm going to give them the credit to say, okay, I think the Bengals are going to do that because they have been playing well. They've just been losing, unfortunately. They've been playing really close games. In some cases, probably not against teams you should be doing, but the Bengals, either way, have been doing fair enough to move forward. So 21%, and they do not control their destiny, so they could win out and still not make the playoffs. So they do not control their destiny in this current week, but we'll see. Kind of like one of those shrug and we'll see moments with the Bengals. But 21% is kind of a low percentage for this early on, but also kind of makes sense with their division, kind of makes sense with how the record is showing up, so can't really fault the percentage or the math really at all. 19% though are the New Orleans Saints. Big fall from grace, being like 2-0, and I'm sure their percentage chance was pretty high in the beginning, and it kind of has fallen from grace pretty easily. I still think they're competing with the Falcons a little bit more than the record shows, but a lot of weeks still to play. But I can see the 19% still being around this. And they don't control their destiny currently, so the Saints could win out and not make the playoffs. So we'll see. 15%, and I'll give so there's two 15% teams, Rams and Raiders. I'll give the Rams a slight nod there because they do not control their destiny. Or sorry, they do control their destiny. So Rams could win out and be fine. Raiders cannot win out and be fine. So Rams control their destiny, Raiders don't. 15% both each. Rams makes sense. They have a division pretty, like, division that's very, very close. So if they win all their games against this division, makes sense. Raiders, they're pretty far behind even two of the teams in the division. And Broncos, they've already lost the tiebreaker to, so are they really going to win against that? It's really, really tough for the Raiders at this point to actually make the playoffs. 13%, though, are the New York Giants. I've seen some flashes here and there, so I'm surprised. I'm not surprised that their percentage chances, at least in the second to last tier, not the last tier. But at the very least, and the division is a little bit easier to fight against to make the playoffs, but at the same time, they are still a very weak team with not a great record at the current moment in time. So then we are down to our bottom 5 teams, and all of these teams have a 1% chance, a less than 10% chance to make the playoffs. Also, the Giants do not control their destiny, for the record. The highest of the bottom ones, though, are the Patriots. Again, kind of goes back to, luckily the Bills have lost a couple times, so it kind of puts them in that maybe striking range of the Patriots are 1-5. The Bills are 4-2. It still kind of puts them in like a realistic range. And against the AFC, so they're going to get a slight nod at the current moment, just because the AFC has been a little bit easier to possibly come back from with such lower range teams. But we'll see. The Titans. Oh, and the Patriots do not control their destiny. The Titans do control their destiny, so the Titans, if they win out, can make the playoffs very easily. Actually, they can just definitely make the playoffs. Now, the current moment in time, the Titans are 1-4 with a 7% chance of making the playoffs. Their division is pretty led by the Texans, so they're really banking on a wild card at this point for the most part, which is also unlikely with some of the higher tier teams. But again, like the Patriots, AFC is a little bit easier to do the wild card at the current moment than the NFC, so makes sense there. Next up, Jaguars are 6%, kind of the same case here with the Titans. They haven't been playing well. I don't see any of these teams really changing. 5%, and the Browns 5%. Neither one of these teams control their destiny at all. So 5% for the Browns here, and then 2% for the Panthers. Unfortunately, the same records across the board for Jags, Browns, and Panthers, but the Panthers are in the NFC in the division against the Bucks, who are 4-2 right now. So it's going to be really tough for them to crawl out of it, especially with so many teams that are kind of in that wild card range for the Panthers. So this is kind of the current layout from highest percentage for the Chiefs to lowest percentage to the Panthers of teams that can make the playoffs. Now, teams won't start getting eliminated from the playoffs officially until like week 12. I think it's usually week 12, week 13 is usually when we kind of see like the 1-11 team, the 2-12 team finally get eliminated or something like that. 2-10 team, whatever. When we finally say, okay, 7-10 Panthers can no longer physically make the playoffs, and that's when we can start putting a no playoff category. But I'll probably do this around the midseason point as well. So like around week 9, week 10, maybe right before we get to the eliminations parts of it, kind of showing you the changes over time. But this kind of just showcasing you the other side of the coin of, yes, there are teams that are really highly rated in my power rankings that don't have a very good chance of making the playoffs, but also you can't just look at pure schedule. But I wanted to respect the percentage chances. Here's a current screen of how this is currently going. So hope you did all enjoy the video. I'll see y'all in the next one.